Well, hello everyone, I'm back for another update here. Today is Monday, October 7th, 2024. It is yet another nice day to be out in the woods hiking. This time directly from my house up Forest Service Trail. And the weather here today is tranquil and still holding on to some warmth here. The temperatures are supposed to drop tonight, however. But conditions in Florida are far different today. They are being threatened by a potential Cat 5 hurricane down in central Florida. And I speak the truth, this hurricane is very dangerous. And people on the west coast of Florida, including my brother who lives on the Manatee River, need to immediately get out of there as soon as possible. They seem to think that they're going to be okay because they're a half hour inland from the immediate coast. But I beg to differ on that because the storm surge could potentially come up that river, even inland, if the storm tracks over Tampa. In my opinion, he should immediately get out of there. And not only that, it's a twofold danger there on that river because there is a dam upriver from them as well, with a lake behind it. That's just one example of why, even inland, you're not immune from the effects if you're on a river especially. This would be a potential disaster for Tampa Bay because, again, if the storm tracks just north of there, Tampa Bay is going to end up with an incredible storm surge unlike anything seen in recent times. There's going to be a massive amount of flooding. If the storm tracks just south of there, Tampa will be spared because the winds will push the water out of the bay rather than into it. But unfortunately, they managed to get the motors going similar to Beryl with this storm. I'm looking at the images. But again, this is not entirely natural. They bombed that system with energy. The motor got going on it because these two X-class flares this past week, we got that geomagnetic pulse from these flares yesterday afternoon. And it's no coincidence that this storm strengthened into a major hurricane about the same time as we got that energy. Prior to this, the storm was on life support. What I mean by that is they were bombing it, they weren't getting very far with it. And that is what happened most of this season before the sun had this flurry of activity. Before the cosmic ray count dropped, I had remarked a month ago that this drop was concerning for this hurricane season because it was going to potentially put enough heat in that water to where these storms could easily be manufactured again by the technology, because they were having a very hard time prior to that. See, if the sole reason for all this storms is warm water, you would think the whole season would have been like this. Why did it not start until first, second week of September getting busy? It's because that's when the cosmic ray count dropped. And I remember me saying I was concerned about the effect that was going to have on this hurricane season, and I even then underestimated the effect. Before that, there was nothing going on. And I really was starting to think the hurricane season was done. We were going to come out of this. And they were going to, all the people were going to make fools out of themselves who made a forecast based on man-made global warming that totally went bust. If man-made global warming was behind it, I would think the whole season would have been from Beryl on nonstop. It's obvious that wasn't the reason for this uptick lately. It's not warm water, because if it was warm water, the season would have never went dead for weeks and weeks like it did. Something is different now than 6 weeks ago. And what is different is the sun has put some more heat into that water with these latest flares we've had. And the cosmic ray count dropped. And it's now down to almost -10 because of this latest flare from this X9 came in last night. And there was a second X7 flare that contributed even more energy prior to that. So we had 2 flares in 1 week. That's the difference. The sun is more active than it has been since cycle 23. And that is the reason why they're able to get these storms going, whereas 6 weeks ago they weren't able to. And I was beginning to think we crossed the threshold where they were not going to be able to get any more storms going at all. But then the sun woke up from its slumber. Yeah, there were 200 sunspots in August for the month over that, but there were no major flares since May. We went several months with no big flares. And this X9 flare could have put enough heat in that water to sustain yet another Cat 5 in the Gulf of Mexico. But if this was global warming, or warmer, record warm sea surface temperatures alone, I would think that this whole season would have been storm after storm like this. And it wasn't. So there is some other cause. Of course, I've seen articles lately that it's just becoming the new norm. Florida is not going to be inhabitable anymore. That Florida had gone years. It's been since 1921 that Tampa has taken a direct hit from a hurricane. Why is that the case? Because most of the time, hurricanes come to Florida and hit the east coast and then move west across the peninsula. They usually don't move west to east across Florida. If the subtropical high is positioned where it normally is, it's to the north and east of Florida in September, and that brings the storms in from the Atlantic side. This year, the subtropical high is positioned very differently and is actually to the south of Florida right now instead of to the north and east. So this hurricane is taking what in the last 100 years has been a very unusual track for a hurricane, extremely unusual, and that is what makes it even more dangerous. Because it's coming from the west instead of the east. And you got some bays on the west side of Florida that a storm surge, these bays, the way they're shaped, the way they're direction they point in, the storm surge is going to be amplified considerably due to a funnel effect just to the south of the landfall position. The winds are going to pile that water in. Any rivers that come off these bays, it's going to be a virtual tidal wave that's going to sweep through. This is why I say, like people like my brother who live on the Manatee River who think they're okay being inland, on a worst case scenario, a tidal wave, a virtual tidal wave could sweep up that river and take out everything in the vicinity, well inland even. It would be like a virtual tidal wave, the tsunami. That is my concern with this storm. But is global warming, is man the cause of all these hurricanes that have hit Florida? I know I saw Cedar Key in the last 13 months has taken 3 hits. They're claiming Florida is becoming uninhabitable. We are in a solar max right now, and it's not a particularly strong one, hasn't been. It's enough to make a difference to where this manipulation of firing energy into these storms may work for until this solar max is over. We go into the next minimum. We're going to see a drop-off in activity for hurricanes. Because we almost crossed that threshold until the last couple weeks where there's not going to be any more storms. There is a ray of hope with this system, though. The latest, the images show it skirting the north coast of Yucatan, which is way further south than they were projecting it to go. And they're trying to use technology to bring it back north because it's off its predicted track. It's going way south. It was not really projected to affect Yucatan. It was projected to stay out in the middle of the Gulf, head directly for Florida. It's not really doing that right now. And you look at the images, you could see that ever since it was obvious it was going further south to try to shoot energy into the northeast, to the northeast of the storm, like really shooting energy at it to try to get it to go further north again. That's what they're doing right now. The big question is it going to work or is it not going to? Because there is an outside chance this storm, if it continues on its present track, may miss Florida and instead head through the Florida Straits and toward the Bahamas and out into the Atlantic. There's an outside chance that still could happen. It may just affect extreme southern Florida in that scenario and continue to infect the Bahamas perhaps and northern part of Cuba. At the moment, that's the way where it's heading. They are trying to very hard get the storm to turn back northeastward. They are trying very hard. I could see it clearly in the images. There's definitely intelligent technology being used with this storm. Not only to intensify it, but to move it in the direction they want it to go. Try to. But I still feel that nature trumps everything. And my hope is that this hurricane continues on the course it's on and defies their technology and continues due east and does not turn north and misses Florida altogether. That's now my hope. Before I was saying that the strengthening wasn't going to happen. Well, it has. I hate to say it. Now I'm saying my hope is that the storm continues on an eastward track and defies the models and defies their technology, and that Florida gets spared the worst. Or that it takes some more southerly track so that at least my brother is spared of the worst of it. But that's the good news, is so far the storm is moving due east. It's not heading right toward Florida at the moment. It's heading toward the Florida Straits and northern Cuba at the moment, and the northern part of Yucatan is going to get it. So, is this going to be it for the hurricane season? Well, there's indications that the sun is going to begin. I know NOAA predicts the peak of the cycle next year, but I have my chart on solar cycles, and there is a wide variation in the cycle as to when the peak occurs. It's all over the place. But I do notice that as a whole, the later the peak occurs, the less of a strong cycle it turns out to be overall. Like on the cycles that went over 200 for 12 or more months out of the cycle, I don't think any of them peaked as late as this. There are a few that you got 6 months out of it over 200. This cycle's not likely going to be stronger than average one. Of course, I'm going by what the historical record shows. Likely that August may be the only month in cycle it goes over 200. It's quite possible, because the northern hemisphere of the sun is shutting down. There is one large sunspot in the northern hemisphere, and that's pretty much it right now. Whereas most of the Groups now are in the southern hemisphere and has been that way for weeks now. I feel that in the next 6 months, still feel that the sun is going to begin to quiet down. And that August is going to be likely the peak of the cycle at 56 months in. I could be wrong with that. There are some cycles where it didn't occur until 80 months in. But there are some that where it occurred 30 or 40 months in. Many, as a matter of fact, cycles. But based on my analysis of this chart and based on the fact that the southern hemisphere is active and the northern isn't that active right now, unless that changes and the northern gets active again, the numbers and the activity in ensuing months is probably going to start to go down toward the minimum cycle. And with the amount of heat they've taken out of the water with all these storms, next season's going to be very quiet unless the activity in the sun continues. We're not going to get anything next year. They got lucky this year because, again, in September the cosmic ray count dropped, and I believe there was a connection there. So this is going to be it. This video. I will be back soon with another update.